Hi, folks. It's Michael, and welcome to another edition of Covenant Nation. And any of you guys ever hear the story of a man about 120 years ago, and his name was Charles Parham, Parham, Charles. And Google him, look him up in Wikipedia. This is the guy that launched the Azusa Street Revival. But today his name is basically unheard of and unknown. Charles Parham was a preacher in Topeka, Kansas. And Charles Parham had a little Bible school. And one day Charles got the bright idea through reading John and reading the book of Acts that, hey, why don't we fast and pray and seek God for the baptism in the Holy Spirit? Now, I'm putting these things in a nutshell just to give you a quick picture of what happened here. So they did. And yes, Papa answered, and he gave them baptism in the Holy Spirit, and these guys are speaking in tongues. Well, Charles just came into the most explosive revelation that the church had had in hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years. And the sad fact of the matter is, nobody believed him. They didn't believe him. He was persecuted. He lost his Bible school. He lost several of his students too, and Charles was vilified. Nevertheless, this was a guy that had something in his soul called tenacity, right? Perseverance. And so Charles Parham persevered, and he's out in the arena of like Galena, Kansas, or Joplin, Missouri. Out in that little corner there. Like in the northeast corner of Oklahoma. You got Missouri, you got Kansas, you got Arkansas over here. He was out in that neck of the woods. After about I don't know, 3, 4, 5 years of Charles just going out on his own, right? And just trying to find anybody who would listen to him, anybody who could hear what he was saying, right? Well, finally, Charles gets invited into this church to pray, or not to pray, but to preach, and he's always preaching on the Holy Spirit. Well, lo and behold, a blind person in the congregation received their sight. People started getting healed. All of a sudden, he captured their attention, didn't he? He got their attention. The Holy Spirit was doing things, but Charles was required for this whole time, basically, people, not just to walk on water, but to stand on the water. And he did. He persevered. He endured through all the insults, all the slander. And one of Charles Parham's very first, if you want to call them disciples or whatever, was this really wonderful black guy. And all I can remember is his name was called Brother Seymour. And Brother Seymour, he got the message. He got the message. He got the baptism in the Holy Spirit. And he was sent to California, to Los Angeles. And he started a little, I don't want to call it a sidewalk mission, but it was just a little mission off the street right in Azusa. And the next thing you know, man, you got what broke out into a worldwide Pentecostal revival to those at that time who could receive it. And it was absolutely real. Absolutely real. I mean, I don't think any of you guys have a huge problem with it. Maybe you do. But that's something to keep in mind, people, that just because you haven't heard it before, maybe because it ain't been preached in many, many hundreds of years, that does not mean that the message is not true. For me, and this has to do with Yahshua, since the time, and I'll be upfront and honest with you, I never, ever, in all my days, ever did I ever want to be a Christian. I always wanted to follow Yahshua, but I did not want to be a Christian. I don't know, I didn't want it, right? It's like they've had that book for 2,000 years and they aren't going anywhere, right? They haven't gone anywhere and didn't like they're going to go anywhere. But that was not really the point. It was just something in my spirit that was just, in a sense, at times, not every place, but at times just kind of repelled. Right? You might say, well, that's because you had the spirit of Antichrist and you were loaded up with demons, Michael. Maybe. Maybe. I don't care, right? Because you know why? Because I had to seek the deliverer. I was an addict. I was a prisoner. I was in a very real way locked away in a deep, dark dungeon, and I didn't think anybody would ever figure out where I was at. I was a slave. God dang, man, take a look at some of the pictures of Israel and Egypt, right, where they, men, the slave masters, the taskmasters, and they were beaten and scourged daily, right? But that's what drunks, addicts, gamblers, people who have fallen into this kind of crap, man, that's what they feel like on the inside, and that's what's happening to them on the inside. And I'm going to tell you something, folks. To a prisoner, to a drunk, to an addict, just to say Jesus died for my sins is not enough. I'm sorry if that offends you. I'm sorry if that wigs you out. I'm sorry if you go batshit crazy to hear that. But to a prisoner, a drunk, an addict, a person who was really in a tough time, man, Jesus died for my sins just doesn't work. All right, but let me tell you what does. Yahshua, the mighty one, the deliverer, that works for a drunk, for a prisoner, for a captive. That works. Yahshua the deliverer. He came to deliver me. So I don't connect, me personally, Michael, I do not connect with Jesus died for my sins, and that's the be all and the end all of the whole situation, right? I connect with Yahshua, the deliverer. And for me, that's the difference. That is the difference, because Yahshua, for Michael, Yahshua came in the fear of God and set me free in a way that I have yet to meet others that can really identify with it, and I think they get offended. It's just that maybe I was a dang sight more messed up than you were. Do you ever stop to think of that? Maybe it took a little bit more for him to set me free, so I needed a very powerful experience, right? To jerk my ass out of that deep, dark dungeon and to set my feet out in the sunshine again. Maybe it took a little more. Maybe some of you can identify with these things, but not all of us were born into Christianity. Right? Some of us were, I didn't have a bad life. I had magnificent parents, right? I did, but I was a spoiled brat and I squandered every good thing they gave me. And I filled my heart with alcohol. I filled my nose with cocaine. And my life was a living hell for quite a while until the deliverer came and set me free. So I'll tell you what, folks, you get offended at that. Man, you got your thumbs up your butt, right? And that's what I'm saying for me, for Michael. That is a difference between Yahshua the deliverer and Yahshua the sin sacrifice. The sin sacrifice didn't set me free. The sin sacrifice couldn't do diddly squat to relieve me of the hellish misery I was experiencing. That sin sacrifice couldn't do it. But Yahshua the deliverer did. And that's why I stress the difference. That's why maybe those of us who have met Yahshua the deliverer, maybe that's why we can latch on to something like the tree of life, grab a hold of it. Maybe that's why we latch on to things like the cross and grab a hold of it and don't let go, because we met the deliverer. Our eyes were opened. We saw the potential. We saw the journey. We saw the goal. And I say we because I'm not the only one out there that he's ever delivered. Anyway, I'm going to hold off with that for now, and I'll be back in a little bit. Folks, I want to tell you another story about another fellow from about 120 some odd years ago. And he was on the other side of the Great Pond, right? He was over there in England, and his name was Rees Howells. And Rees Howells had been born into a pious Christian home. And he grew up, thinking he was pretty hot stuff. He wanted to be a missionary, wanted to be a preacher, wanted to walk the streets and, teach the word and so on and so forth. And so he did for several years as a young man. And you'll probably have to go in and Google his story because it's pretty good. I read a book about so thick about him. And Rees Howells was quite a guy. He was quite a guy. But Rees Howells came into a sudden and thunderous revelation that for all that he thought was his wonderful robes of righteousness, one day God lit him up and he saw that he was walking around in a pile of crap. That's what God thought of the righteousness that Rees Howells had as a young man, right? Having been born into a pious Christian home. and that he had the righteousness that came by faith, right? And God lit him up and showed him it was crap and it was stinky. And the fear of God came upon Reese Howells, man, and he cried out and he found out, dang it, man, there is such a thing as a strong man, and he got to get driven out so that you can walk, so that the Holy Spirit can occupy that sucker's house, man. Do you get it? Anyway, so Reese got that revelation, and Reese came into the knowledge of the Holy Spirit big time in around 1904, and he was with the Welsh revival. Well, Reese became just a phenomenal powerhouse intercessors, and he gathered, he made himself a small army of intercessors. Well, here it is, a couple of decades later, right? And boom, what happens? Hitler, World War II, and Reese Howells is the guy that God himself called upon to stand in the gap during the Battle of Britain. And I don't know if you're too familiar with that, but the Royal Air Force was nothing, people. It was nothing compared to the Nazi Luftwaffe. This was the greatest frickin' Air Force that the world has ever seen, the Nazi Luftwaffe, right? And here's Little Britain, right? But I'll tell you what, in that battle, they opened a can of whoop-ass and turned the tide of the war to a very great extent, right? Well, God had his number one intercessor, a man who was filled with the fear of God and the Holy Spirit, standing in the gap for that battle, him and his army of intercessors. And I think at about that time, he probably had about 130, but this was like, Britain's Battle of Armageddon, man. It was like their Battle of Armageddon against Hitler and the Nazis. And well, hey, you're still alive, so I guess you know how the battle turned out. We won. Anyway, but that's just the story of Reese Howells, and the reason why I brought that up is because not everybody has to have been into a debauched, hedonistic lifestyle before they start chasing after, the Son of God. Not everybody, came out of, like I say, a debauched life, right? There are plenty of people today that are just like Reese Howells, right? But they're kind of gambling on their stinky righteousness. But when the fear of God comes upon even a righteous man, take a look at Isaiah. He was not a stinky sinner. In Isaiah 6, man, in the year that King Uzziah died, I saw Yahweh high and lifted up. And I tell you, right, he was, for all intents and purposes, according to the law and the commandments, Isaiah was a righteous man who came into the most powerhouse encounter in the fear of God that probably anybody had since the days of Moses. That's how powerful that was when he was caught up into the throne room. Woe is me, for I'm a man of unclean lips, and I'm from amongst a people of unclean lips. Woe is me, and that's the place where your heart is beating like a jackhammer. It's beating so hard, you kind of are scared that your whole guts are going to blow up. Your heart's beating so hard. That's how traumatic it can be, folks. But it's the all-time game changer. It is the all-time game changer in a person's life, the fear of God. Open the book and read it, and that's the deal. And I think this is the faith that Yahshua is looking for. This is really the faith. Do you have the faith to reach out and grab a hold of this? Because this will catapult you. I don't care, like I say, if you came out of a debauched lifestyle or if you were raised up in a pious Christian home. This is the game changer, people. The fear of God, the Holy Spirit, when it comes with fear and trembling as the deliverer. And all of us born upon this planet, folks, we are in desperate need for an encounter with the deliverer. Every man, woman, and child has a tree of the knowledge of good and evil in them. And when the deliverer comes, he sets the axe to the root of the tree. He chops that sucker down, and now you're going to walk out the dying and the death of that tree and the birth and the revealing of the tree of life. Oh, gee, you haven't heard that message preached. I guess you just better put it on the shit can, right? But I'll tell you what, I don't care whether you've heard something like this preached or not. Go before God and ask him about the veracity of what you're hearing here. Is it really your will, O God? Is it really your purpose, O God, to restore unto us the tree of life? Is this true? You are obligated, those of you who are hearing, you're obligated to go before him and seek him about what you're hearing. Because this is big, people. This is big. This isn't one of your Silly little Christian revivals, which is here today and gone tomorrow. This never leaves. This never leaves. You're going to be in a permanent revival for the rest of your life. And the rest of your life is endless. 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 Because it's eternal. But you've got to have the Holy Spirit, people. The Holy Spirit needs to come with fear and trembling. And if for no other reason, to crack open the fountain of wisdom within you. If for no other reason, to crack open the fountain of knowledge within you. For the fear of God is the beginning of knowledge, and the fear of God is the beginning of wisdom. And it takes wisdom and knowledge, people. It takes wisdom and knowledge. It really does. I don't know why that would seem like a strange thing, but it takes the wisdom of God and the knowledge of God to return you to the abode of God. Makes sense? I'm sure it does. That's why when the Holy Spirit comes, the Holy Spirit leads you and guides you into all truth and understanding. This is the sevenfold Holy Spirit, people. Meditate on the lampstand. Get a vision. Get an understanding. This is what God desires to put into you when you will acquiesce and seek His face with all your heart. Fast and pray if you need to. Remember what Yahshua said about the bridegroom? Look, if you are not experiencing the bridegroom, if you are not enjoying the presence of the bridegroom, what did he say to do? In that day, you need to fast and pray and cry out for the bridegroom. If you're not experiencing him, then follow the instructions. Fast, pray, cry out to him, seek his face. But I tell you truly, people, seek first the fear of God. Deuteronomy 10:12, and now, O Israel, what is required of you but to fear him so that you will walk in his ways. Guess what, people? God is offering you his power to set your feet in his ways, and the Holy Spirit will open up his ways to you. Anyway, that's really pretty much, I guess, all I wanted to top this off with is just to say that you don't have to have been, a rotten, stinky person, right, to receive the fear of God. That's all I'm trying to say. That's all I'm trying to say. And anyway, I'll talk to you guys later. Okay? All right. Bye-bye.